Thank you, Jimena, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see me from this top here. So today I am talking a little bit about genetics. I will present one of my projects, genetic relationship between behavioral traits and feed efficiency in dairy cows. From 44% of the operational cost in milk production in the United States in 2022 was related to feed costs. And so select animals that are more feed efficiency seems to be an economically important factor because it can impact on the costs of the dairy farms. But to evaluate feed efficiency, we need to have daily feed intake measurements. These are usually taken in those type of feeders, automated feeders, but because the data provenient to these daily intake measurements are usually from research stations, because it's an expensive equipment, and is also labor-intensive data collection. Behavioral traits, on the other hand, can be easier to collect. For example, rumination time, lying time can be measured using ear tags or collars that are already in use in some farms to monitor cows. And those traits can be related with feed efficiency. Therefore, the aim of our project was to estimate genetic parameters of the behavioral traits and the association with feed efficiency in lactating Holstein cows. We use data from 728 Holstein cows and collect over 36,000 daily behavior records and 6,000 weekly feed efficiency records during 15 nutritional trials that happened in Emmon Blaine's Dairy Cattle Center, or the famous Arlington, between 2019 and 2023. We evaluate two behavioral traits, rumination time and lying time. This was evaluating using smart bowl ear tags, and we evaluate 2 periods of data. So daily data was the total minutes per day of each behavior, and the weekly data was the average minutes per day within a week for each behavior. We also use feed efficiency related traits, dry matter intake, the 3 most common energy sinks, which was milk energy, change in body weight, and metabolic body weight, and residual feed intake. Dry matter intake was collected using Incetec automated gates, and it was collected daily for each animal. Milk energy was calculated based on fat, protein, and lactose percentage, and milk yield weekly for each of the cows. Change in body weight was the difference between the beginning and the end of difference in body weight at the beginning and the end of each week evaluated, and the metabolic body weight was the average metabolic body weight of the week. And finally, residual feed intake, as the name says, is a residual. So it's the error here from this regression of dry matter intake on the 3 main energy sinks that I mentioned before. Finally, the last concept we are talking here is resilience. Resilience is generally defined as the capacity to maintain performance or to bounce back to normal function after a disturbance. What is a disturbance? It's something that can cause any kind of stress in the animal. So we can talk about diseases, social interaction, change in temperature, environmental changes, changing the management, feed diet, among many others. Since it's hard to capture all of these disturbances, and also those disturbances can interact with each other, use general consistency as an indicator of resilience can be an alternative to evaluate how the traits respond to these disturbances. So moving for the results, here we observe the heritability of lying and rumination time in daily and weekly measurements, and we see that they are from moderate to high, indicating that behavioral traits are possible to be selected, and it will respond to producing genetic gain. Repeatability here was higher values ranging from around 60% to over 80%. And this higher value here in the weekly data is because weekly data has less noise than daily data. So we can expect that the animal will continue ruminating or lying similarly across the days or across the weeks. Here we have the genetic correlation between the behavioral traits and the feed efficiency traits. I will focus on dry matter intake and residual feed intake as the feed efficiency traits here. So we see that rumination is highly and positively corrected with dry matter intake. So animals who eat more will tend to ruminate more. And for residual feed intake, we also see a high and positive correlation. Because it's a residual, we want a lower value. So in this case, we expect that animals who ruminate more tend to be less feed efficient. For lying, we didn't see significant correlation with dry matter intake, but we saw negative correlation with RFI. In this case, animals that lie for longer periods tend to be more efficient. Here we have an example of a consistent and an inconsistent cow. A consistent cow is a cow that don't vary much from the expected average of in this case, the rumination. Here we see the inconsistent cow. So we see that she varied a lot in her rumination time across the period. Those animals were evaluating the same environment, same trial. So we can see that we can identify consistent and inconsistent animals. Again, we want to know that if this consistency is heritable. So here, keep in mind, we are not evaluating rumination and lying anymore, but we are evaluating the log variation, or the variation of the deviation from the expected value for each behavior and for the feed efficiency traits. Then we can see here that we have a moderate heritability for the log variation of the behavioral traits, and a high heritability of the log variation of the feed efficiency traits. So the consistent is a heritable trait. We can select animals to be more consistent. Here we see that there is a positive correlation between both behavioral traits and the log variation of dry matter intake, indicating that animals that ruminate more and lie more are less consistent in the dry matter intake. And for residual feed intake, we see positive correlation for log variation of line, but negative correlation with log variation of rumination. So animals who are more consistent in ruminate, they are less consistent in residual feed intake, and animals that are more consistent in line time are less consistent, are more consistent in residual feed intake. So finally, we can conclude that behavioral traits are heritable and repeatable, and also their consistency are heritable. Cows that eat more tend to ruminate more and therefore be less efficient. More efficient cows tend to spend more time lying during the day. And so behavioral traits and their consistency could be indicators of feed efficiency. I would like to thank you, everybody, and I'm taking any questions.
Thank you, Barbara. The floor is open for questions.
I have one to start if you want.
Good, because I have one too.
Are we going to fight, Paul? No.
No. You'd win that one.
So I was curious, you were showing that more consistent animal compared to the inconsistent one. The consistent one was producing a lot less than the other one. I don't remember what the axis was.
So it was rumination time. So we have the expected rumination time and the recorded expected daily rumination time. The recorded daily rumination time was closer to the average comparing to the other one, the inconsistent one, when she was ruminating like in the top and then she goes all the way to the bottom. So we have a rumination.
And we want an animal that ruminates more or less? What's better in your opinion?
This is tricky because the animal who eats more will ruminate more because she will have more food. But they tend to be less efficient, so it's kind of hard to get to an optimal point where we have an animal who eats enough to continue to produce milk, but not too much to like increase rumination. That's why we see it as an indicative and not like we can replace feed efficiency for rumination, for example, because we have this positive and negative effect of correlation with rumination and residual feed intake and dry matter intake. So.
All right, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. Based on that consistency and inconsistency that you saw, were there any like key factors that like explain whether a cow is consistent or inconsistent in those behavioral traits?
You would say what is causing the consistency? In this case, we are not looking exactly what was the cause. We didn't check like exactly, but we had, there is another study in our group that we could see, for example, higher temperatures cause a lot of drops or inconsistency in that period. So you can identify if there is something really serious happening. You will see that animals, even if it's a consistent animal, you will see a drop coming back, or at least this drop in, for example, milk production will not be too pronounced compared to an inconsistent. But in this case, I didn't look exactly what are the perturbations affecting the animals or what happened. We could try to track, but as I said, it's hard because they can interact, and there are some effects that we are not able to control or even to see. So, thank you.
All right, time for one more question. We have a question. Here we go, Sophia.
Yeah. Thank you. Interesting data. Did any correlation with production?
I did with milk energy only, but not directly with milk production.
Because I would think that cows that eat more will be producing more milk, maybe?
No, we see that cows we saw genetic correlation between milk energy and rumination, So cows who ruminate more tend to have higher milk energy, but we didn't see any significant correlation with lying time with milk energy. So it's milk corrected for fat protein, but not exactly with milk.
Okay, let's give another round of applause to Barbara.
Thank you.